Namaste ji, namaste. So, Article 12 in state. So, any question that pops up in the law optional regarding what are the limitations of state as defined in Article 12, how is state defined in Article 12, what is the relation between, let us say, local authority and state, whatever, anything that relates to state and Article 12 slash fundamental rights, you're going to be writing this answer. So, this is particularly about Article 12. Now, Article 12 says in this part, which part are we in? Part 3 of the Constitution. Unless the context requires, the state includes the government and parliament of India. Note it down, bullet points में बना लीजिएगा, I believe, जैसे यहाँ पे. So government and parliament is included already, alright. And the government and legislature of each of the states. So union government is included for sure, the state government is included for sure, and all local or other authorities within the territory of India or under the control of government of India. So as soon as you're going to start out this answer, you're going to say Article 12 is the first article in part 3. It contains that the state will mean government and parliament of India, point number 1, government and legislature of each state, point number 2, all local or other authorities, point number 3. And sari jo ladai hai, and why are we writing this answer and why the question will pop up, is what is the meaning of this other authorities? See, everything in the constitution that you're studying, whether it's for the GS2, whether here, primarily speaking, Supreme Court का role ही यही है to tell you if a confusion exists, is to tell you, I mean, what do you do in this case, alright? So, in cases के अंदर, the Supreme Court is going to be telling you what does this word mean, and that is why, that is what we study primarily in law school, via judgments, and that is why we are being asked to write this answer. Then you're going to mention fundamental rights are mostly claimed against the state, mostly because certain fundamental rights are available against private individuals as well. Now Article 13 के अंदर शब्द the state, alright. अच्छा, Article 12 में state है. Article 13 के अंदर पहली बात तो शब्द is law. What does this law contain? Law, does law contain a constitution amendment? That we have already, आपको course के अंदर मिल जाएगा. Lecture, we have studied this in detail. That's the entire story of Keshavanand Bharati. But what is law? And what is state? The state shall not make any laws. Now which state? Now state, you said local authorities. Is LIC a state? Is RBI a state? Is SBI state? What is this other authority? And that is what the answer is for. And if you illustrate that and elucidate that point to the examiner, number आएंगे ही आएंगे, he cannot avoid giving you the marks, alright. So article 12 को break down कर देंगे ऐसे 3 pointers के अंदर, and you're going to be telling what is the रिश्ता between article 12 and 13, because 13 के अंदर कह रहा है the state shall not make any law. But what is the state as given in article 12? But then there is an ambiguous word called other authorities. हमें नहीं पता what does this mean, right? So other authorities are, this word is interpreted by the Supreme Court. Government, the main cardinal issue is whether government acting through departments or through officials, does this fall within the definition of the state? So no doubt. But what about the autonomous bodies? The government is well clearly acting through its officials, through, well, let us say ministers. Has the Union of India done anything? Yes, obviously. इसके ऊपर बोलने की भी क्या बात है? But what about these bodies, right? What about these autonomous bodies? Now, what are these autonomous bodies? Two kinds. One is the statutory, one is general law. Basically, one is created under a statute, which mostly are state, and under general laws. For example, let us say the Societies Registration Act or the Companies Act. If, let us say, the government registers a company under the Companies Act, makes a corporation under the Companies Act, does that company fall under the purview of Article 12, the meaning of the state there? That is basically जो core जो fight है आपकी, alright? Now for this, do mention this in your answer. You have to mention this in your answer. For this, the Supreme Court has set up instrumentality, the doctrine, or rather the concept of instrumentality, that whether that said entity is an instrument of the state, a public corporation being a creation of the state, is subject to constitutional limitations as the state itself. Write this down word to word, pause the lecture, write this entire sentence down, rewind it if you need be. Alright. Now in the case of Rajasthan State Electricity Board versus Mohanlal, a state electricity board, the Supreme Court said yes, it is under state in Article 12. Acha, let me just pause here while you write this down. And why is this concept there? Think about it. If the government, let us say we let the government go, कि आप एक अलग body बना लो, then you won't be subject to fundamental rights. Isn't this a very easy escape route for the government to just bypass part 3, keep on making these small little companies and keep on doing work through them and claiming Article 12 ने तो बोला था and Article 13 ने बोला था that the state shall not make any law. But there are these companies, हमने तो कुछ किया ही नहीं. फिर है तो part 3 will just be a decoration, right? मतलब just cosmetic makeup ही तो है, it is not really effective. To bypass that, are we, or rather to prevent the bypass of that, are we studying these case laws? Hopefully the funda is clear. See, in life and law in general, if the funda is clear, especially in the law optional as well, you'll be able to write far better answers than your competition, because after all we are in a competitive exam, so we have to do better than the other guy, right? And we have to do the best to our ability as well. Once you understand which game is being played, I believe you can always play it better, provided that we know what the examiner is trying to test us on, and this is where mostly people get into trouble with the law optional, because this is a slightly TEDA optional to tackle, because the point of view needed is slightly TEDA in nature while writing an answer for the mains. It's as simple as that, because law itself, sometimes 2 plus 2 is 4 in law, sometimes 2 plus 2 is 22. We have to tell the examiner that we understand both as a future prospective administrative services officer, that I know why the law is the way it is. Secondly, I understand what exactly is required of me, not as a judge, not as a lawyer, but as a future mostly IAS officer. If not IAS, then IPS or IFS, whatever your cadre will be. Acha ji. Rajasthan State Electricity Board versus Mohanlal. In this case, State Electricity Board. You said, well, yes, you are basically you are falling under the definition of the state. Now, board, they argued. Look, ours is हमारा जी commercial nature है, we too are doing business. So the Supreme Court said, so what? Article 298 says government is empowered to do trade. So government is doing trade via you, in your name. मतलब via you in the sense sort of quasi कह सकते हैं, proxy कह सकते हैं. You are state. Case law number 1. So decision was, just because there is some element of trade or commerce involved does not mean that you're not state. That's no defense. So the government threw it out. Then we go to Sukhdev versus Bhagatram. Sukhdev versus, this is a cardinal case law. आप ये mention करें ना करें मुझे नहीं फर्क पड़ता. ये mention करना ही करना है, no matter what happens. Sukhdev versus Bhagatram. In this, LIC, ONGC and the Finance Corporation, they were authorities as defined under Article 12. So they fell under the word state. Supreme Court said, basically their defense was, भाई we तो are independent personalities, we are independent legal personalities, ये तो नहीं होगा. Supreme Court said नहीं, यहाँ पे ये argument नहीं चलेगा. You are basically an instrument of the state. You're primarily being created by the state. सारे पैसे state के लगे हुए हैं. State is telling you what to do. How are you not state? अच्छा point है, इसीलिए ये आप mention करेंगे. Then we go to Ramanna D. Shetty versus International Airport Authority. The IAA, International Airport Authority, generally otherwise was a statutory body, that is, it is being created by a statute. It was held to be a state. In this case, आपका D. Shetty versus International Airport Authority, Supreme Court laid down tests to determine whether a corporation is an instrumentality or agency of the government, or that it would be subject to constitutional limitations. So mostly statutory authorities, well, settle law that RBI etc. are state. What about non-statutory bodies? Right. So up till now, basically, we have now laid down the tests and declared the International Airport Authority also to be a state. But what about non-statutory bodies, as in they are created under or registered under a separate statute, but they're not being created thanks to a statute. So that's a non-statutory body. So for example, let us say the Office of the Chief Information Commissioner is a statutory post, you can say, because it is being created by the statute, that is the Right to Information Act. Right? Because the Right to Information Act says that there shall be a Chief Information Commissioner, therefore that post exists. But under this case, for example, let us say that you create an NGO, and NGO has to be registered under Societies Registration Act 1860, if I'm not mistaken about the year. That's not a statutory body, it's being registered under a statute. So it's sort of a different, a minor difference, but the difference exists, right? Now, Sabajit Tiwari versus Union of India, Indian Council of Scientific Research. It was registered under the Indian Societies Act. Even though the state was fully governing it, etc., it had full contribution. It was held not to be a state, even though it was funded by state. So Supreme Court just took a completely different approach, but this decision was overruled later. Now what? Now we come to the cardinal case law of Ajay Hasia versus Khalid Mujib 1981. तो अभी तक सुप्रीम कोर्ट थक गया था कि यार आए दिन ये लोग आ जाते हैं अपने रोना लेकर कि यहाँ पे ये स्टेट है कि नहीं है. So it just wanted to comprehensively lay down a law. This is here, Ajay Hasia. There is no way on the planet that you're writing an answer on Article 12 without mentioning Ajay Hasia. ठीक है जी. So Ajay Hasia versus Khalid Mujib in 1981. This was society registered under the Societies Registration Act. This was basically a regional engineering college जो होते हैं छोटे-छोटे जो government वाले जो होते हैं. Every region has one. It was sponsored, it was supervised, it was supported financially by the state government, that college. Now you tell me what is going to be happening. Yes, it will be state, but the Supreme Court laid down certain guidelines. So it said check the share capital, whether government owns the share capital or no. If yes, then that goes a long way in determining whether it's an instrumentality of the state or not. Then check for financial assistance. Then if the government is giving it financial assistance, thanks to which it meets almost every expenditure, again goes a long way in determining whether it's state or not. If the body enjoys monopoly status by the government, yes. Point number 4, existence of deep state control, that is government ने nominate कर रखे हैं board members, government is practically speaking running the board. 5th, functions are of public importance. So the institute or basically any body is discharging anything that is of significant public importance. Well then, these are all relevant factors. So these guidelines were given in Ajay Hasia, very, very prominent case law for you to mention in your answer. ठीक है जी? The important question is not how the juristic person is born, but why has it been brought into existence? So the Supreme Court said कि महाराज ऐसा है, you don't care under what law are you registering the body. The why is the important part. ठीक है जी? So अब Supreme Court said there is no fixed formula, it is a varying position, it's case to case basis, but आप broadly ये अजय हास्य के अंदर जो हमने जो बता दिया आप ये follow कर सकते हैं. Mere regulatory control is not state. This was in the classic case of whether BCCI is a state or not. ठीक है जी? अच्छा तो BCCI की it was in this case law it was said, well, BCCI first and foremost it was noted that it was not created by statute, so it was registered society under the Societies Registration Act. No part of share capital was given by the government. There is no financial assistance, major assistance that is being given by the government, but however it did enjoy monopoly status without almost state protection. मतलब BCCI के अलावा कौन चला सकता है क्रिकेट देश में. No deep state control in it, as in state के कोई members नहीं बैठ रहे, state का कोई president से लेना देना नहीं है. It is an autonomous body, that it's a self-governing body. Therefore, it was held, even though it discharges a function that is of almost controlling the entire, you can say, the game of cricket in India, which is a significant revenue generator as well. It still is not state because there is no government ka paisa, there is no government involvement. Even though yes, government supports it slightly, but it's just not state because it cannot be said to be an instrumentality of the state. So that word is important. Mention it in your answer again and again. I've already discussed it, but why these case laws? Because why are we pursuing the government? Well, why are these other entities? So government is creating these other entities and we are telling the government कि बेटा यहाँ से भी तुम्हें आर्टिकल 12 में ले लेंगे और आर्टिकल 13 के तहत अभी भी तुम वो काम नहीं कर पाओगे, that you won't be able to violate part 3. ठीक है जी? अच्छा जी. Because otherwise the government would be tempted to create multiple entities and bypass part 3 altogether. जहाँ पे आंसर में जगह मिले एग्जामिनर को समझा दीजिएगा कि हाँ भैया मुझे पता है, सिर्फ रट्टा मार के नहीं आया हूँ, पढ़ कर आया हूँ, समझ कर आया हूँ. ठीक है जी? Now we come to Pradeep Kumar Bishwas versus Indian Institute of Chemical Biology 2002. So that's a 7-judge bench. It held कि जो अजय हासिया के अंदर जो guidelines हमने दी हुई थी, they were not exactly very rigid. So in each case, check these three, whether that said entity is financially, functionally, administratively being controlled by the state. So these 3 pointers were given by 7-judge bench in Pradeep Kumar Bishwas versus Indian Institute of Chemical Biology in 2002. ठीक है जी. Now what happens when an entity is being declared as a state? मतलब it gets declared as a state. It becomes subject to Part 3. It becomes subject to administrative law. It becomes subject to the writ jurisdiction of the Supreme Court under 32 and 226. ठीक है जी. Got it. अच्छा, आगे चलते हैं. B.S. Minhas versus Indian Statistical Institution. Well, yes, it was declared. It is a state. What about local authorities? DDA is a state. Union of India versus R.C. Jain. The authority must have a separate. It was basically held in this case law. The authority must have a separate legal existence as a corporate body to be a local authority. So when you're concluding your answer, you're going to be writing that there is basically the definition of state is ever expanding as more and more technology also comes in. Like for example, is CoWIN, that entire entity that is running CoWIN, is that state right now, right? So it is an ever expanding definition so that no bypassing of Part 3 becomes possible by the government. There is no fixed position as such. Mention Ajay Hasia and Biswas case. Those are landmark cases. कुछ और mention करना हो ना करना हो, मतलब case laws में से बोल रहा हूँ मैं. Ajay Hasia and Biswas will go in the answer no matter what. ठीक है जी. And in the next lecture, state के बारे में तो हमने बात कर ही ली. Now let us cover out law under Article 13 कि भाई ये क्या है, इसके अंदर क्या क्या आ जाता है, right? So anytime that they ask us an answer on Article 13, our model answer will be already prepared. Alright, see you in this one. Take care, bye.